Thank you very much, and thank you for taking the time to listen today. Um, right.
Just a second, please. Just a
Just
second,
give me a
please. We have
second.
some
There we
issues
go. Um,
with our sound
I'm going to
system.
talk about the digital future.
Mr.
Some of you
Watson,
may have, hopefully, if you're all in the cyber world, you've all heard of
Mr.
William
Watson, can you
Gibson,
hear us?
the guy who was behind
Ospravedlňujem sa veľmi pekne. Toto vyzerá
Neuromancer
trošičku
and
ako
creating the
digitálny
whole
problém
concept
v
of
e-governmente,
cyberpunk.
ale...
But he came up with a fabulous
Hello,
phrase
Mr.
that the
Watson.
future is already, it's just not evenly distributed. And I think this is really quite an important point to emphasize
Hello, Mr.
to
Watson.
governments, industries, and businesses all across the world that technology is a lot more advanced than some people perceive it to be in terms of what's available now. And we want to have a quick look at some of that. So what I'm going to show you today is not anything apart from one tiny example, which you'll understand, that is research and development, might be with us soon. I'm going to try and show you stuff that you might not think is available now, but is. I want to start off with explaining where Huawei's position is in this in terms of creating those products. I'm very fortunate. I work for a company who are one of the top 5 R&D developers in the world. And those are last year's figures. There is a position now that we've declared because of currency variations, we will spend between 14 and 15 billion dollars a year on R&D moving forward. So that puts us in that group of 4 or 5 companies who spend an astronomical amount of money on R&D and then productize certain things. Hopefully the sound is much better now.
Yes, it is better.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. If I can humbly contribute to the discussion first. First of all, I wasn't going to give any of my background, but I am 15 years or so a CIO in the UK government before joining Huawei. So I went through the digitization, digital transformation debate in the UK about 10, 12 years ago. And now I have a slight advantage. I contribute to these discussions about digital transformation in government in 10, 12 countries across the world currently. So I hear a lot of this discussion all the time. And I was pleased to hear the term finally used there about digital transformation and to move on from the point of digitization. Digitization is a term that I try to encourage people not to use, because if you start with departments pushing to digitize, what they're actually doing is digitalizing a manual process, and it reinforces the silo that already exists within government. Part of the leadership function that I saw many years ago in the UK, and now we advise customers across the world to follow, is can we bring common services to departments first as part of breaking down silos? So earlier on in the conversation, I heard people mentioning the difficulty of validating digital signatures. You can work around that by working on identity and access management, which means people can only create product to be reviewed by civil servants because they've already identified themselves in the system. So the digital signature is actually because the product has come from within the system. So I just listening to this conversation, and I've had this conversation so many times about don't digitize what's already there. Good technology will help you do better what you already do well. If you don't already do it well, the technology will be a further disruption to your efficiency. And that sounds like quite a harsh statement maybe to make because plans are in place and everything. But actually digitizing something that isn't a good optimized process is not progress. And that's why we actively encourage people to think very carefully about the absolutely common services across government, to work on them first, contribute that into every department's digital strategy, and all the time you're trying to suck commonality out of what people do. And the absolutely commonality is identity. So I know it's a long time since I've been involved in it, but I am now a user of it. You have the Verify service in the UK, where whether you wish to register your car, register a birth, get a passport, do your tax return, you have to log in through your Verify account, then go to government services. You don't go to individual departments, you go to Verify first. And it's the thinking of the strategy to try and make sure this is as integrated a thought leadership process as it is. And industry is as guilty as government in not always thinking this. And I say I now have a huge advantage because I'm involved in this conversation 10, 12, 15 times a year at this kind of level, at these kinds of events. So that's why I see this commonality of discussion about digitization versus digital transformation. So I would just offer that up. There was also the conversation on size. What we find, my own experience and working with customers now is, yes, there can be some really big projects in there, but once you've got a common data structure agreed and you've got common services agreed, you're into what the Japanese called Kaizen, which is tuning in quite a small way lots of processes. And that's when you can also start to bring in a whole different economic contribution to this from small businesses. Because innovation in a Kaizen incremental improvement way is in quite small applications and algorithms, and that can come out of university startups, university spin-offs, small entrepreneurial companies, through open data strategies. Now, I've thrown so many things on the table here. Open data, common data models, consistent identity and access management solutions. But that type of thinking means you're building off of a platform that is very difficult for civil servants to try and continue to maintain siloization in government structure. They're forced into commonality in a way that historically has been very difficult because processes were very manual. And I don't know if that helps, but it's just, I say, I'm part of these kinds of conversations so often. That's my view from having had this conversation so many times. I don't know if anyone has an observation on that.
Thank you very much. And now we can continue with your presentation if you wish.
Okay, my presentation, now that I've heard the conversation and the discussion, is going down a slightly different track, and it focuses on industries and technologies that aren't just government. One of my point was to try and point out what is available that people continue to think is not currently available. And there are a bunch of industries that are not just about government services. So it's maybe a slightly lighter look at the topic. Give me a second. Oh. Right. Hopefully you can see a screen that says digital progress.
Yes, we do.
Before contributing to any of these types of events and discussing with customers, I tend to go to the UN e-government survey just to get a positioning statement on each country. You look at this, which is the e-government development index for all countries in the world as the UN rates it. And you will see that Europe sits in the very high group. It's nice to say Slovakia sits pretty much on the border between high and very high, and in the last 2 years has actually tipped over into very high. So, but even within Europe, as you're now discussing, as you were comparing, there is clearly technology being used elsewhere that you're not exploiting at the moment. And when you read into the narrative of the survey, some of it's about technology, some of it's about application. I have the advantage of working for a company who has sight of what is really bleeding edge technology, and the time to market for a lot of our technology is speeded up because of that. We will be spending consistently $14 to $15 billion a year on R&D moving forward, and that will be reflected on products. It's not all large core products. We also focus on the end point, and I'm going to look at some industries, slightly less standard industries than just government services, to give you an insight in that. Oh, wrong direction. First of all, we've all mentioned the COVID. Several people have mentioned the COVID pandemic. One of the things that we discovered when they tried to build a hospital in 2 weeks, they looked very closely at business services. So back to my point about digitization, digital transformation, it had to be digitally more, operationally more efficient and digitally very efficient in order to operate. And one of the key things they were looking at was scanning patients with lung infections from COVID to figure out the ones that were likely to need immediate intervention and those that could be treated and hopefully avoid that. These are the times that they publish. I spent 2 years as a CIO in a medical part of government, and I think these are out. I don't think it's 12 minutes to do the diagnosis of the scan and 2 minutes for the output. It's probably 20 minutes and 10 minutes. But the point is, it's a time. We worked with an AI supplier in the medical world who said, we can do the AI diagnosis in 10 seconds. And they have consistently delivered that to a high level of quality. It takes about 30 seconds to produce the output. And because no one trusts AI implicitly and fully, it takes 2 minutes for a specialist to just confirm what the AI has seen. But of course, you can build a hospital in 2 weeks, as we now know, but you can't staff it in 2 weeks. So what had to happen was you had to introduce a means of having a to-do list of scans to be reviewed, not in the new hospital in Wuhan, but across the medical network of all of China. And that's how one of the efficiencies was brought to bear, that the reviewing of scans was done everywhere, not just in the new hospital. So you're seeing how the technology changes the operating model of hospitals. We're all talking about smart cars. Everybody talks about self-driving ones. But actually, a car is somewhere that many people are spending 1-2 hours a day. I was talking to a colleague this morning who travels 20 kilometers in Norway, and it takes him over an hour. Well, in the car, you will recognize a screen like this. But the high car solution we use uses facial recognition because it's also trying to spot when the driver should be pulling over for a rest. But it also allows you a level of engagement with the rest of your life. So in Norway, they're very keen not to operate on time-based heating because that leads to homes being heated when you're not there. So in the car can ask you as you get into it, are you now going home? Yes. In that case, then we'll modify the heating in your home to bring it up to standard just as you arrive. You can engage with other smart devices in the home. And these are quite common in parts of the Far East. We're seeing this technology being used day in, day out. Smart agriculture, not something I thought we'd be covering today, but as a former CIO in policing, you mentioned drones, AI, and facial recognition, and everyone shudders. But actually, what happens when you use drones, AI, and plant recognition? Because now I'm looking for weeds in agricultural fields and crops. Then I put a sensor on each sprayer of pesticide so it only sprays precisely where weeds have been identified. That alone has cut pesticide use where it's deployed by 95%. Now, nobody likes pesticides, and that's a great example of this. And actually, if you do it well enough and you intervene early enough, you can actually start. I said I wouldn't do any R&D. This is obviously R&D, where you load pesticide into the robot, and the robot goes and deals with the weeds on a point-specific basis. And we think we can get pesticide use with that style of technology of drone and robot working together down by 95%. And there's no diesel bill for the tractors and everything to drag it about. It does require quite high intensity data transmission, which is 5G, but there's now localized versions of 5G that can cover farm footprints. We're interested in the environment. Everybody's now interested in the environment because of the health issues that we're seeing. We saw particulate environmental pollution, nitrous oxides, ozone, etc., dropped because we were all working from home. And these help influence politicians make medium to long-term decisions on infrastructure. But what about environmental management on the immediate side? Smart poles are now becoming a common thing. Run by solar energy, provide street lighting, which is their function, but actually you can mount cameras and sensors on them. And these sensors can give you micro environmental awareness. And what we're seeing in cities across the world now is the diversion of traffic off of routes to say, this route ahead is now so polluted, we're diverting you off. It's something that's been experimented with in London. Some of my former colleagues are now using it, where they're actually stopping traffic going down certain roads. And sometimes the experiment is with a non-human intervention version. It's one where the AI is predicting the growth. So it's diverting traffic before it hits the critical level. It sounds as though in traditional IT models, these would be complex and siloed systems, but actually you have this device pipe cloud concept that is now being applied, which is you have sensors running their own light operating system with lightweight radios connecting to the 5G element. The 5G element is allowing data flow into the clouds. The clouds are using big data to interpret all of the sensor input information. And sensors, by the way, can also be phones, laptops, tablets, and the engagement from the citizen. And that then groups, collates, and presents the data up, having brought it together and concatenated it to whatever vertical is relevant, be it smart medicine, smart agriculture, smart cars, smart education, smart government. It doesn't matter. So it's the same fundamental architecture that now supports smart moving forward, device, pipe, cloud. And that's my very rapid run over, just to say, when you're a decision maker in this world, it's amazing. When I go to the countries, you see people having this debate about, where am I in the world? I can't use that, it's not real technology. Well, first of all, as I showed in the earlier United Nations graph, Slovakia is actually very well placed in the world in terms of its exploitation of technology. But I can guarantee, like every other customer I speak to, you'll feel you're far behind. You're not. You're actually reasonably well placed and improving, which is the other key thing. And also reach out and find out where these technologies are real. Like the Verify solution in the UK, which I share that example with many people. It's the common method and it gets around the whole problem of digital signatures.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time and for your presentation.
No problem.
And once again,
Thank you.